HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Insect Crisis, The Fall of the Tiny Empires That Run the World, by Oliver Milman. Read by Gerrard. Prologue. The first inkling of the cataclysm was the deathly stillness. The countryside, suburban gardens and urban parks, their soundtracks now muffled, became lifeless imitations of themselves. No more rumbling buzz-saw of a passing bee, no metronomic chirping of a cricket, no nagging whine of a famished mosquito. Landscapes suddenly felt as flat as the oil paintings they inspired, perhaps even less vivid, given the riot of colours that had been wrenched from the ecological palette once the iridescent butterflies and flamboyant beetles were gone. The world's insects had vanished, but the lag of human inertia meant that the first howl of horror, oddly, came not from us, but rather from birds. The skies and forests were the settings for increasingly frantic bluebirds, nighthawks, woodpeckers, and sparrows as they searched for aphids, moths, and other meals no longer there. The deficit was huge. Around 200,000 insects had to be served up to raise a single swallow chick to adulthood. Now, there were none. In all, half of the roughly 10,000 species of birds on Earth starved to extinction, their withered corpses strewn on the ground and within barren nests. An array of dead bodies, birds, squirrels, hedgehogs, humans, in fact anything that set foot on land and was mortal, began to build up across valleys, hills, parks, and neglected city apartments. Blowflies, which laid maggots able to consume 60% of a human corpse within a week, were now absent, as were the moths, domestic beetles, and the rest of the cavalcade of insects that previously arrived to break down the deceased. Bacteria and fungi were still there to do the job, but at a far slower pace. It wasn't enough. The rotting carcasses and putrid smell triggered public revulsion, until that, too, became normal. As if the world around us was conspiring to turn our stomachs, the lingering flesh and bone was compounded by a tsunami of feces, seemingly everywhere, left wherever it fell. Farmers in Australia had previously endured a painful lesson on the importance of the right sort of dung beetle being present after cattle were first introduced by European settlers. Now, the continent was awash with vast areas of useless land caked in livestock manure that the native beetles, more used to marsupial dung, weren't able to break down. With 8,000 species of dung beetle, a group that had been doing a thankless clean-up job for the planet for at least 65 million years, wiped out globally, this disaster now repeated itself on a far grander scale, with feces from wildlife and livestock pockmarking the planet unchecked like a foul plague. Millions of acres of land were laid to waste. Felled trees and leaves also started to accumulate, stubbornly refusing to disintegrate back into the earth. Disgust and then alarm began to take hold around the world. Environmental groups mobilized, holding rallies featuring people dressed as bees, while politicians huddled in emergency meetings and issued hasty promises of action. It felt like something could be done. Then, the food supply disintegrated. More than a third of global food crop production was dependent on pollination from thousands of bee species, as well as other creatures, such as butterflies, flies, moths, wasps, and beetles. With pollinators gone, a global conveyor belt of food production shuddered to a halt, with sprawling fields of fruit and vegetables left to wither away. Farmers no longer needed to spray pesticides to vanquish pests, but lamented that the invaders would have little to destroy anyway. Items such as apples, honey, and coffee faded away from supermarkets and became expensive luxuries. The disappearance of Cecidomaid and Ceratopogonid midges, the unheralded pollinators of the cacao tree, cut off the supply of chocolate. People openly wailed in the streets at this loss. Rates of depression and anxiety soared. The loss of bees stripped the world of readily available items, such as strawberries, plums, peaches, melons, and broccoli, with the remaining fruit and vegetables oddly shaped and pathetically shriveled. Mercifully, An apocalyptic starvation event was averted thanks to our reliance on staples such as wheat, rice, and maize, which are pollinated via the wind. Still, meals became blander and less nutritious, even in wealthy countries. Without access to fruit, vegetables, nuts, or seeds, millions of people eked out a grim diet based around oats and rice. Any thought of consuming a mango or almond became a decadent fantasy, before the experience faded from collective memory entirely. With no chilies, cardamoms, coriander, or cumin, curries became a historical dish. Restaurants of various hues, struggling to even source tomatoes or onions, closed en masse. Cows, once fed a diet of now scarce alfalfa, dwindled. Fewer cows meant shortages of milk and dairy, which in turn meant no cheese, yogurt, or ice cream. Governments started to assemble armies of workers to hand-pollinate crops, although this proved wildly more expensive and far less efficient than the 100-million-year-old codependency that had evolved between insect pollinators and plants. A rash of new companies launched swarms of drones and robotic bees in an attempt to replicate the real thing. These efforts proved insufficient. As with most calamities, the poor and vulnerable fared worst. More than 800 million people globally were malnourished before the insects vanished, and many of them were pushed over the edge into starvation once the nutrients from pollinated crops receded. Cases of childhood blindness jumped as vitamin A, derived largely from fruit and vegetables in the developing world, was eliminated from diets. The curses of malaria and West Nile virus were removed from the planet along with the hated mosquitoes, although a lack of citrus ushered in the return of scurvy. As hunger killed humans slowly, other maladies progressed. Insects formed the basis of alternative medicine in various parts of the world, including India, Brazil, China, and swaths of Africa. Honey was used as an antioxidant and antimicrobial substance, deployed in the treatment of heart disease. Wasp venom was found to kill cancer cells. With the rise of antibiotic resistance, insects were once seen by researchers as a crucial source of new, widespread medicines. Perhaps they would even help beat back the next pandemic. After all, the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine was developed in altered cells of the fall armyworm moth. The catastrophe snuffed out such hopes. Before long, the struts holding aloft most life on Earth were yanked away. Nearly 90% of wild flowering plants relied on pollination to prosper. Shorn of this service, and lacking the nutrients that insects recycle back into the soil, the plants died. Gardens became lumpen deserts. Wild meadows vanished, followed eventually by tropical rainforest trees. More than half the human diet globally came directly from those formerly flowering plants, multiplying the starvation rates. Entire ecosystems collapsed, accelerating climate change. Cascades of extinctions rippled through our denuded planet. For those of us left, the misery was finally complete. 1. An intricate dance. The question of how long human civilization would withstand the loss of insects is both hideous and unfathomable. Hideous because the collapse of arable farming and ecosystems could wipe us out within just a few squalid months. The biologist E. O. Wilson has predicted. Most of the fishes, mammals, birds, and amphibians would plunge into oblivion before us, followed by flowering plants. Fungi, after an initial explosion from the death and rot, would also die off. Within a few decades, the world would return to the state of 1 billion years ago, composed primarily of bacteria, algae, and a few very simple multicellular plants, Wilson wrote. And yet, unfathomable. Such a dire scenario can barely be comprehended, given the stubborn survival of insects through the 5 mass extinctions that have roiled Earth in the past 400 million years. Humans have never existed without them, so have never had to properly consider their absence or even diminishment. But a torrent of recent findings have pointed to major declines in the abundance and species diversity of insects in places around the world. Seemingly without cause, they are crashing. their numbers thinning out at astonishing rates at different research sites, in some places by half, others by 3/4, and in the seemingly benign countryside of Denmark, as cataclysmic as 97%. The mounting evidence of plummeting insect populations forces us, for the first time in our history, to grasp the wretched consequences of their decline. This book will explore the unfolding crisis in the insect world, what's causing it, and what can be done to stem the loss of the miniature empires that hold life aloft on our raucous, plastic-strewn, beautiful planet. In a bewilderingly rapid reimagining of our world, what was once infinite now seems jarringly vulnerable. Without insects, the world's wealthy could perhaps deploy the resources required to indefinitely stretch out a semblance of the status quo. But for the majority of humanity, the loss of insects would be an agonizing ordeal, eclipsing any war and even rivaling the looming ravages of climate breakdown. Most of life on Earth would disappear if we didn't have insects, and if there were any humans left, they wouldn't be having much fun, says Dave Goulson, Professor of Biology at the University of Sussex. I think it is stretching it a bit to suppose that all humans would be dead in a few months, but there is no doubt that millions of us would be starving. Insects have been involved in an intricate dance with almost every aspect of the terrestrial environment for millions of years, forming an underappreciated foundation for human civilization itself. They multiply our food, act as food themselves for the other living creatures around us, rid us of the foulest waste, eliminate unwanted pests, and, crucially, nourish the soil, the 15-centimetre, 6-inch patina wrapped around our globe that sustains all of humanity. Rachel Warren, a professor of environmental biology at the University of East Anglia, compares our deeply woven reliance on insects to the internet. In an ecosystem, everything is connected by this net of interactions, she says. Every time you lose a species, you're cutting some of those links in this network. The more links you cut in the network, the less of this internet there is left, until eventually it doesn't work anymore. Without a pollinator, a plant dies and isn't replaced. The birds that feasted on the plant's fruits, or the deer that browsed on its buds, start to dwindle, followed by the animals that feed upon them. The whole food web just disintegrates, Warren says. I don't think humans could survive in that world at all. The weight of this dependence has failed to spark much devotion for insects. 3 out of every 4 known animal species on Earth are insects, and yet, within their massed ranks, only butterflies are considered with anything close to affection. Wasps are a baleful summertime menace, ants an invading army, fought with toxic sprays in the kitchen, and mosquitoes everything from irritating nuisance to lethal threat. Most of the other 1 million species of identified insects are considered by many people, if they are ever considered at all, to be either quirkily obscure or pointless. There are around 7,530 types of assassin fly, a creature that spends its short life spearing other insects with a sturdy proboscis in order to paralyze them and liquefy their internal organs. This horde alone comprises more species than mustered by the entire world of mammals: apes, elephants, dogs, cats, domestic cattle, whales, the lot. A botfly called Cephalopena titillator matures in the nostrils of infested camels, just one specialist among 150 species of botflies, while there are at least 500,000 species of parasitoid wasp, creatures so detested by Charles Darwin that he wrote in a letter, "I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have created them. What would really be lost if these abhorred wasps and flies, maybe all flies in general, just vanished? You get rid of flies, you get rid of chocolate," says Erica McAllister, a senior curator at the Natural History Museum, London, and an avowed defender of flies, who once took part in an entomologist go-kart event dressed as one. Appropriately, she successfully chased down a colleague who was dressed as feces. Flies are really important pollinators when it comes to carrots, peppers, onions, mangoes, and a lot of fruit trees. And chocolate. They work longer hours than bees and don't mind the cold as much. We're beginning to finally take notice of all this. There are approximately 160,000 species of Diptera, an order more commonly called true flies or two-winged flies, which includes houseflies, midges, mosquitoes, and fruit flies. The number of fly species is at least 4 times larger than all the different types of fish found in the world's oceans. This diverse group perhaps deserves to be viewed as a collection of finely tuned environmental engineers rather than as annoying pests that circle overhead or speckle browning bananas in fruit bowls. Tiny midges, each the size of a pinhead, crawl into the tiny flowers of cacao plants across Africa and South America and keep the world's $100 billion chocolate industry from collapse. Thousands of different blowflies, flesh flies, and soldier flies dispose of dead animals, rotting leaves and feces for free. Scientists have harnessed maggots for the treatment of gangrenous wounds without antibiotics, while oil has been extracted from the larvae of black soldier flies and turned into a form of biodiesel to run cars and trucks. They're doing such wonderful jobs, all sorts of things that we just don't realize, says McAllister. Can you imagine if they didn't? You'd be swimming along in a quagmire of feces with Uncle Jeremy floating past you. Flies are recondite, yet prodigious pollinators. Volucella zonaria, a hefty hoverfly with bumblebee-like black and yellow hoops on its abdomen, is basically a flying tank, according to McAllister. It is capable of buzz pollination, which means it can grip onto petals and violently vibrate, releasing pollen that is stubbornly lodged in the anthers of a plant. Few bees are able to do this, meaning without flies there would be no cornucopia of tomatoes and blueberries available for us to feast upon. Some plants are completely dependent on certain flies. One extraordinary creature, Megasterinchus longirostris, is found on the west coast of South Africa. It has a non-retractable proboscis that measures up to 7 centimeters, almost 3 inches long, several times its own body length, making for an awkward flailing appendage when flying. It flits around plants that have developed tubed flowers that perfectly fit the fly's lengthy probe, further highlighting an evolutionary theory posed by Darwin after he was sent some orchids from Madagascar in 1862 that stored nectar in exceptionally long necks. Darwin suggested that a moth with an absurdly long tongue must have evolved alongside this plant, a species that was only discovered decades after the evolutionary theorist's death. If just that fly in South Africa disappeared, 8 plant species would die out immediately, says McAllister. Flies have got a huge history with pollination that has been wildly ignored. Even on their own terms, flies can fascinate. Some species present edible gifts to potential mates, while others perform intricate dances. To some people, flies could even be considered beautiful. Michelle Troutwine experienced a pivotal moment as an art student when, as part of a studio review, she unveiled a vast biological illustration of a stonefly, an order of insects with elongated bodies, long antennae, and 2 pairs of membranous wings. The art professor hated it, recalls Troutwine. The professor strongly preferred the work of a student who had smeared wet cat food across a blank white canvas. I remember just thinking, that's it, I'm out. Troutwine just fell into flies, and is now a leading entomologist in her discipline at the California Academy of Sciences. While stoneflies are not typically gushed over as classically photogenic, there are flies that could lay claim to such adulation. The Leucomia notha soldier fly from Queensland, Australia, has an iridescent, opal-like exoskeleton, a shimmering blur of purple and blue. Another fly with a bright golden abdomen has been named Plynthena Beyoncé, after the singer Beyoncé. Entomology is a really beautiful, aesthetically pleasing field, says Troutwine. She was drawn to flies and insects in general because they resemble aliens on Earth. There's millions and millions and millions of them. We don't even know how many, Troutwine says. Each one is like an alien life form with a detailed life history that often is so bizarre you couldn't create it as fiction if you wanted to. As dizzyingly diverse as insects are, they share a remarkably consistent body design comprising 3 segments: head, thorax and abdomen, 3 pairs of jointed legs, compound eyes, antennae, and an external skeleton. This structure provides the platform for feats that would cause widespread awe if performed by larger animals. The Dracula ant can snap its mandibles at 322 kilometers, 200 miles per hour, the fastest animal movement on Earth. Their cousins, the African Matabele ants, have been seen carrying injured comrades back to the nest to tend to their wounds like 6-legged paramedics. Some caterpillars generate their own antifreeze to ward off the cold. Honeybees understand the concept of zero and can add and subtract numbers. But these creatures, so numerous that they are both unknowable and annoying, so odd-looking that they inspire the forms of malevolent beings in horror movies, and so vital that we would perish without them, now appear to be suffering a silent existential crisis. The alarm over insect declines has been rung intermittently for some time, if not quite as loudly as now. As early as 1936, Edith Patch, the first female president of the Entomological Society of America, gave a speech decrying the expanding use of insecticides on fruit and vegetable crops. Certainly, too little popular emphasis has been given to the service of insects to mankind, Patch said, adding that too few do realize our dependence upon them for most of our food and clothing, a significant amount of our industry, and for much of our pleasure. More presciently, if mankind's goal is a wholesale destruction of dangerous insects, his brain will provide the equipment for such a campaign in the course of time. In the decades since, humanity hasn't consciously geared its collective brain to decimate all sorts of insects, much as it hasn't deliberately decided to drown its coastal cities and fuel enormous wildfires through climate change. Nevertheless, that has been the result. Through the destruction of insects' habitats, the spraying of toxic chemicals, and, increasingly, the heating up of the planet, we have unwittingly crafted a sort of hellscape for many insects, imperiling all we rely upon them for. We are creating a world that is not only a problem for insects, but even for us, for humans, says Pedro Cardoso, a biologist at the Finnish Museum of Natural History. The exact dimensions of the insect crisis have long been obscured by a fog of logistical impossibilities. There are 1 million named insect species, but as insects are small, cryptic, and not extensively tracked, this is only a glimpse of what is undiscovered and unnamed. Estimates vary from an eye-watering 30 million species to a more realistic 5.5 million. Who knows what's out there, says Goulson. Probably all sorts of weird and wonderful beasties. Taxonomists, the biologists who name species and work out where they fit into the larger puzzle of living things, face a Sisyphean job just to differentiate between seemingly identical species. To most of us, some ants are black and some cinnamon-coloured, some flies are big and some are small, but beyond that the distinctions end. Specialists have to spend a lot of their time gazing at insects' reproductive organs to make their classifications. We are genitalia fiddlers, says McAllister, the fly expert. We like nothing more than cutting open a fly and looking at its ghoulies. This painstaking work, combined with the fact that taxonomy is increasingly dismissed as a fusty natural history version of stamp collecting by students now more drawn to molecular biology, means that the job of describing all insect life on Earth will probably never have an end date. As McAllister puts it, we've got 50,000 people studying one type of monkey and one person studying 50,000 types of flies. For every fly successfully identified by its genitalia, science dumps many more potential candidates on the desk of taxonomists. In 2016, Canadian scientists completed a DNA analysis of more than 1 million insect specimens and were shocked to find that the country probably has around 94,000 insect species, nearly double the previous estimate. If Canada has 1% of the world's insects, the researchers mused, the planet has around 10 million insect species. Even with what is already described, it's clear we live in an invertebrates world. Just 5% of all known animal species have a backbone. The globe is filled with not people or sheep or even rats, but beetles, 350,000 species and counting. What we do know about overall insect populations doesn't immediately spur thoughts of shortage either. The Smithsonian Institution estimates there are around 10 quintillion, that's a 10 with 18 zeros following it, insects in the world. A locust swarm can contain 1 billion individuals. The southern portion of England alone hosts 3.5 trillion migrating flying insects a year, a mass of bodies weighing the equivalent of 20,000 flying reindeer. If you got all the termites in the world and scrunched them into a giant ball, this seething clump, a measure known as biomass, would weigh more than all the birds on the planet. Before people started ballooning in both population and girth in our era of industrialized modernity, all the world's ants probably weighed more than all the world's humans too. Today's human population is adrift in a sea of insects, as a pair of Iowa State University scientists wrote in 2009. Based solely on numbers and biomass, insects are the most successful animals on Earth. Insects are surprisingly hardy and adaptable too. The Sahara Desert ant can survive temperatures of up to 70 degrees Celsius, 158 degrees Fahrenheit, while in the other extreme, the larvae of the Antarctic midge can cope with minus 15 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and as long as a month without oxygen. Tiny ephydrid flies can live and breed in the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park that would fry a human. Bumblebees have been found at 5,500 meters, 18,000 feet above sea level, a height just shy of Mount Kilimanjaro's summit. Dragonflies can steadily hover in fierce winds that would down even the most advanced helicopter. A horned dung beetle is so strong that if it were a human, it would be able to hold aloft 6 double-decker buses. You could say that the insect family embraces the bizarre. Insects breathe in and out via holes called spiracles in their exoskeletons, and see via intricate compound eyes, allowing creatures such as dragonflies to have a 360-degree field of vision. Stingless bees feed on human sweat and tears. A species of butterfly has an eye on its penis, and some aphids can produce young that already contain their own babies. Effectively, they give birth to their own grandchildren. Insect populations are normally fairly elastic too, able to navigate huge spikes and troughs when dealing with changeable conditions. But while insects are legion, that doesn't mean that they are utterly disposable. They all play some sort of role in pollination, or in decomposition, or in the food chain. Start yanking enormous numbers of insects out from the environment, and the whole web of life, including humanity, is thrown off kilter. The collapse can fold in on itself too. Around 10% of insects are parasites, often of other insects. If certain wasps can't find caterpillars to act as their slave puppets and egg hosts, or if certain flies can't hijack an ant's brain and then decapitate it, they too are under threat. This dangerous scenario is now coming into focus as scientists have started to piece together the puzzle of insect life. A warning shot was fired in 2014 with a compendium of available research that found that a third of invertebrate species documented by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, are in decline, with these population decreases amounting to 45% globally over the past 4 decades. The losses were nearly double that of vertebrates. Almost all of Orthoptera, an order of insects that includes locusts, grasshoppers and crickets, is on a downward trajectory, as is the majority of species making up the vast order of Coleoptera or beetles. Such animal declines will cascade onto ecosystem functioning and human well-being. The study of IUCN data warned, framing this calamity within what's known as the planet's 6th mass extinction. The ongoing annihilation of nature, unprecedented since the demise of the dinosaurs, at the hands of the smokestacks and bulldozers of humankind. This roiling extinction event has some formidable totems: tigers, rhinos, elephants, polar bears. The plight of these animals, often referred to by the unlovely term charismatic megafauna, dominates media discourse and conservation funding. The success or failure of the effort to halt the ransacking of Earth's biodiversity is regularly seen to hinge on the fate of the handful of large beasts that are endlessly portrayed in movies, advertising, stuffed toys, and sporting team logos. This institutional vertebratism, as the entomologist Simon Leather has put it, is, in a more literary realm,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?